Judge Henry Taylor, a 70-year-old veteran with gray temples and a gaze that had seen it all, sat at the bench, reviewing documents. His face was stern, but his eyes betrayed fatigue. In his 40 years on the bench, he had learned to spot posers, and in his view, Michael B. Jordan was exactly that. A little actor who thinks fame will shield him from the law, Taylor muttered under his breath, recalling tabloid headlines. Star loses control, and Jordan attacks photographer. In a city where racial tensions were already palpable, this incident was a powder keg. White conservative commentators railed about celebrity privilege, while the black community whispered about a setup. Michael sat at the defense table, dressed in a simple navy suit, no tie. His face was calm, but his eyes were sharp, as if scanning every corner of the courtroom. There was no lawyer beside him, which stunned everyone. Instead, Michael held a folder of documents, his fingers calmly flipping through pages. Reporters whispered among themselves, "Is he really defending himself?" To Taylor, it looked like another stunt for the cameras. The back doors opened, and the prosecutor, Elizabeth Kane, a 50-year-old woman with a sharp tongue and a shark's reputation, entered. Her gray suit fit impeccably, her movements precise, like a surgeon's. She cast a quick glance at Michael, a faint smile flickering on her lips. For her, this wasn't just a case. It was a chance to prove the law applied to everyone, even celebrities. "Your Honor," Kane began, her voice cold and clear as a crystal chime. The defendant, Michael B. Jordan, on September 12, 2024, in downtown Philadelphia, deliberately assaulted photographer David Reese, causing bodily harm. We have video footage of the incident, testimony from 3 eyewitnesses, and a medical report confirming Mr. Reese's injuries. She paused, letting the words sink in. The courtroom buzzed, reporters scribbling furiously. Kane continued, "Mr. Jordan may be a star on screen, but in this courtroom, he is a citizen who broke the law. We demand he be found guilty and receive a punishment that sets an example for all." Taylor nodded, his gaze shifting to Michael. "Mr. Jordan," the judge said, his voice low and sharp, "you've chosen to represent yourself, which is, to put it mildly, unusual. Are you ready to present your position, or are we wasting time on your Hollywood theatrics?" Laughter rippled through the courtroom. Michael stood, his movements unhurried but confident. He adjusted his jacket and looked directly at Taylor, his eyes unwavering. "Your Honor," he began, his voice calm but deep, like one of his movie characters. "I'm not here for a show. I'm here to prove I'm not guilty. And I'll do it with facts, not fame." Taylor raised an eyebrow. Audacity? Or confidence? He wasn't sure, but something in Michael's tone put him on edge. Michael turned to the jury, his gaze open, almost intimate, as if speaking to each juror individually. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "I'm accused of assault, but the truth is, I was the victim of provocation. That evening, David Reese followed me for 3 blocks, blinding me with his camera flash and shouting insults. He pushed me, and I only defended myself. This was an assault. It was self-defense." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Reporters scribbled frantically, and Kane's face tightened. Michael raised a hand, asking for silence. "I request permission to present evidence that will show what really happened," he continued, turning to the judge. "I have a surveillance video showing the entire incident from another angle, as well as a witness who will corroborate my account." Kane shot up. "Objection!" Her voice cracked like a whip. "The defense didn't submit this evidence in advance. This is a procedural violation, Your Honor." Taylor leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "Mr. Jordan," he said slowly, "you know the rules. Why should I allow this evidence? Michael didn't back down. He took a step forward, his voice quieter but firmer. Because truth matters more than formalities, Your Honor. I'm not a trained lawyer, but I know a courtroom is where justice is sought. This video and witness will prove I'm not guilty. If you deny them, you're denying the truth. The courtroom fell silent. Even Kane seemed stunned by his directness. Taylor felt his throat go dry. Who was this man? An actor playing a role, or someone who truly knew what he was doing? I'll consider your motion, Taylor said, leaning back in his chair. The hearing will resume tomorrow at 8. As the judge left, Michael sat down, his face impassive. Reporters rushed for the exits, their voices blending into a cacophony. Jordan's defending himself, and is this his new role? But Michael paid no attention. He opened his folder and began taking notes, his hand moving swiftly and confidently. That evening, Taylor sat in his office, holding a glass of bourbon. The Jordan case file lay on his desk, but his thoughts were elsewhere. He turned on the TV, where a late-night talk show dissected the scandal. The host, a man with perfectly styled hair, mocked. Michael B. Jordan thinks he can play a lawyer? This isn't a movie set. The guests laughed, but Taylor muted the sound. Something about Michael's demeanor in the courtroom gnawed at him. It wasn't a performance. It was conviction. He opened his laptop and began searching. It turned out Michael wasn't just an actor. In college, he studied law at Howard University, graduating with honors, but choosing acting over a legal career. Taylor felt a tightening in his chest. Had he underestimated this man? The next day, the courtroom was packed. Rumors of the alternate video had spread through the city, and a crowd outside the courthouse was barely held back by police. Taylor entered with a stone-faced expression, but doubt gnawed at him. "Mr. Jordan," he said, taking his seat, "I'm allowing you to present your video and witness. But I warn you, if this is a waste of time, you'll regret it." Michael nodded, his face calm. A technician activated the projector, and a surveillance video appeared on the screen. It showed Michael walking quickly down the sidewalk, with Reese trailing him, camera in hand, shouting, "Hey, star, show us your dark side." Reese pushed Michael, who stepped back, raising his hands, but the photographer stumbled, hitting the curb. A punch? No. It looked like Reese's own clumsy move. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Kane jumped up, demanding the video be stopped, but Taylor raised a hand. "Silence," he barked. Then he turned to Michael. "Your witness." Michael called Anna Martinez, a 62-year-old shop owner near the incident site. Her gray hair was neatly tied in a bun, and her voice trembled with nerves. "I saw everything," she said, looking at the jury. "That photographer was chasing Mr. Jordan, insulting him. He pushed him, then fell. Michael was just trying to get away." Kane began cross-examination, but Anna held firm. The courtroom buzzed, jurors exchanging glances. Taylor felt his certainty in Michael's guilt slipping. Michael stepped forward, his voice quiet but piercing. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he said. "I was targeted because I'm famous, but I'm not guilty, and I believe you'll see the truth." Taylor looked at him, and for the first time in his career, he felt that the man before him wasn't just a defendant, but someone who could reshape this case. The second day of the trial in the case of Michael B. Jordan, the Hollywood star accused of assaulting a paparazzo, drew attention not just locally but across the nation. Television broadcast every detail, and social media exploded with hashtags #FreeMichael and #JusticeForReese. Judge Henry Taylor entered the courtroom with a stoic expression, but his eyes betrayed unease. Michael's performance the previous day, the surveillance video, and Anna Martinez's testimony had shaken his confidence in the actor's guilt. Taylor had spent a sleepless night reviewing case materials, trying to understand who this man truly was, a star playing a role or a legal genius who had outsmarted everyone, including him. Michael sat at the defense table, as he had the day before, without a lawyer. His navy suit was the same, but today he added a tie, deep red, contrasting with his calm, almost monastic expression. Before him lay the same folder, now heavily annotated, and beside it a glass of water he hadn't touched. His fingers rested calmly on the table, but his eyes tracked every movement in the room. Prosecutor Elizabeth Kane flipping through her documents with the look of a predator ready to pounce. The jurors whispering, casting cautious glances at him. The reporters, their pens scratching furiously. Taylor struck his gavel, and the room fell silent. "We continue the hearing in the case of Pennsylvania versus Michael B. Jordan," he announced, his voice low and raspy, like an old vinyl record. "Ms. Kane, your turn." Elizabeth Kane stood, her movements precise and measured, like a clockwork mechanism. She glanced briefly at Michael, a faint smile, not friendly, but promising a fight, flickering on her lips. Kane knew the previous day had been a setback. The video and witness had weakened her position, but she wasn't about to surrender. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she began, her voice cutting through the air like a scalpel. "Yesterday, the defense tried to distract you from the facts with an edited video and a witness whose objectivity is questionable. But let me remind you, David Reese, the victim of this assault, suffered a concussion and a fractured wrist. This wasn't an accident or self-defense. It was a deliberate act of violence." She approached the jury, her heels clicking on the wooden floor, echoing in the silence. "Mr. Jordan wants you to see him as a victim," Kane continued, her voice quieter but more piercing. "But he's not a victim. He's a man accustomed to fame solving all his problems. That evening he lost control, and now tries to evade responsibility by playing the role of a lawyer. Don't let him fool you." The courtroom buzzed. A few jurors nodded, particularly the older ones, a man with a gray beard and a woman in glasses who seemed to have already made up their minds. Taylor noticed Michael's fist clench slightly, but his face remained impassive. "Ms. Kane," Taylor said, "do you have new evidence, or are you merely repeating yesterday's points?" Kane didn't flinch. "We call David Reese the victim of the assault," she replied. Reese was led to the stand, a lanky man in his 40s with a pale face and a bandaged wrist. His eyes darted nervously around the room, but when he spoke, his voice was firm. "I was just doing my job," Reese said, looking at the jury. "I'm a photographer. I shoot celebrities. That evening I followed Jordan, sure, but I didn't touch him. He suddenly turned, pushed me, and I fell. That's how I got my injuries." Kane nodded, her eyes gleaming. "Mr. Reese, did you provoke Mr. Jordan?" she asked. "No, res snapped. I was just asking questions, taking photos. That's my job." The courtroom buzzed again. Taylor felt a tightening in his chest. Reese sounded convincing, but something in his demeanor, 2 quick answers, an evasive gaze, raised doubts. When Michael's turn came, he stood slowly. His movements were calm, almost leisurely, but they carried the strength of a boxer before a punch. He approached the stand, holding a sheet of paper. "Mr. Reese," Michael began, his voice warm but with a hint of steel. "You said you were just doing your job. But does your job include shouting racial slurs? Like the word I won't repeat in this courtroom, but which you used 3 times that evening." Reese flinched, his eyes widening. I "I didn't say that," he mumbled. Michael held up the sheet, a printout from social media. "This is your Twitter account, correct?" he asked, showing the document to the jury. "Here's a post, dated a month before the incident, where you used that same word. And another, where you complain about stars who think they're untouchable. Coincidence?" Kane shot up. "Objection. This is irrelevant to the case." "On the contrary," Michael replied calmly, turning to Taylor. "This shows Mr. Reese's motive to provoke me and exaggerate the incident. Your Honor, I request permission to continue." Taylor felt his pulse quicken. He nodded. "Proceed, Mr. Jordan." Michael turned back to Reese, who now looked like he wanted to sink through the floor. "Mr. Reese," Michael continued, "you claim I pushed you, but the surveillance video shows you approaching me, waving your camera. You tripped over the curb, didn't you?" I don't remember," Reese muttered, his voice trembling. Michael paused, letting the silence weigh on the witness. Then he turned to the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice quieter but more piercing, "I don't deny I was irritated that evening. But I'm not an attacker. I'm a man who was harassed, insulted, and provoked. And I believe you'll see the truth." He sat down, and the courtroom erupted in whispers. Jurors exchanged glances. Kane bit her lip, and Taylor found his gaze lingering on Michael. This man wasn't just defending himself. He was dismantling the case like a seasoned surgeon. The next hours were intense. Kane called 2 more witnesses, Reese's colleagues, who backed his story. But under Michael's cross-examination, their testimonies began to crumble. One, a young photographer, admitted he didn't see the moment of the assault, only heard Reese's shouts. The other fumbled details when Michael asked where Reese was standing before the fall. When the defense's turn came, Michael called another witness, Takesha Williams, a 58-year-old nurse who was heading home and saw the incident. Her gray hair was braided, and her voice was calm but firm. "I saw that man with the camera chasing Mr. Jordan," she said, looking at the jury. "He was shouting insults, pushing him. Mr. Jordan just stepped back, raising his hands. The man fell on his own." Kane tried to shake her testimony, but Takesha stood like a rock. Her words rang with sincerity, and even the older jurors, who had initially nodded at Kane, now looked at Michael with renewed interest. At the end of the day, Taylor announced a recess until tomorrow. As the courtroom emptied, he noticed Michael quietly thanking Takesha. She smiled and placed a hand on his shoulder, like a mother proud of her son. That evening, Taylor sat in his office, holding an untouched glass of bourbon. Case notes lay on his desk, but his thoughts were with Michael. He turned on the TV, where analysts dissected the day's proceedings. One, an elderly lawyer, said, "Jordan's not just an actor. He's handling this case like a pro. If he wins, it'll change everything." Taylor switched off the TV and rubbed his temples. He didn't know how this case would end, but one thing was clear. Michael B. Jordan wasn't who he'd thought. The next day, the courtroom was packed, the air crackling with tension. Michael entered with the same calm confidence, but today there was fire in his eyes. He knew this was the decisive day. Kane opened with a final blow, calling an expert who analyzed Reese's injuries and claimed they were consistent with a strike. But Michael, armed with medical literature he'd apparently studied overnight, dismantled the testimony, pointing out that a wrist fracture could result from a fall, not a strike. When the time came for closing statements, Michael stood. He faced the jury, his voice quiet but piercing, like a whisper in the silence. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "I don't deny I'm famous, but fame doesn't make me guilty. That evening, I was a man harassed, insulted, and provoked. I didn't strike, Mr. Reese, I defended myself, and I believe you'll see the truth, not because I'm a star, but because the truth is on my side." He sat down, and the courtroom fell silent. Jurors stared at him. Kane gripped her pen so tightly her knuckles whitened, and Taylor felt his heart pound. He didn't know what the verdict would be, but one thing was certain. Michael B. Jordan had changed this courtroom. A few hours later, the jury returned. The foreperson, an elderly woman with kind eyes, stood. "We, the jury, find Michael B. Jordan not guilty." The courtroom exploded. Reporters rushed for the exits. Cameras flashed, and Michael closed his eyes, exhaling. Takesha and Anna, seated in the gallery, embraced, their eyes shining with tears. Taylor struck his gavel, demanding silence. He looked at Michael, and for the first time in his career, he felt compelled to say something off the record. "Mr. Jordan," he said, his voice quiet but firm, "you surprised me, and this courtroom. You reminded us that truth isn't a privilege, it's a right." Michael nodded, his lips curling into a faint smile. "Thank you, Your Honor." As he left the courtroom, the crowd outside erupted in cheers. But Michael didn't stop for the cameras. He got into a car and drove away, leaving behind a city that would buzz with his name for a long time. Today was the final day of the trial in the case of Michael B. Jordan, the Hollywood star accused of assaulting paparazzo David Reese. What began as another scandal had become a battle for truth that held the nation in suspense. Judge Henry Taylor sat at the bench, his gray temples glinting in the light. At 70, he had seen hundreds of cases, but none had made him question himself like this one. Michael B. Jordan, whom he'd initially dismissed as a spoiled actor, had revealed himself as a legal strategist, dismantling accusations with surgical precision. The surveillance video, the testimonies of Anna Martinez and Takesha Williams, the devastating cross-examination of Reese, all had shifted the case's trajectory. But Taylor knew the final word rested with the jury. Michael sat at the defense table, his navy suit and red tie standing out against the pale faces around him. His hands rested calmly on his annotated folder, but his eyes scanned the courtroom. He didn't look like a man awaiting a verdict, more like a chess player who had anticipated every move. Prosecutor Elizabeth Kane, by contrast, seemed tense. Her impeccable gray suit couldn't hide her pursed lips or the nervous glint in her eyes. She knew she'd lost control of the case, but still hoped for a miracle. Taylor struck his gavel, and the room fell silent. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he said, his voice raspy but firm, "have you reached a verdict?" The foreperson, an elderly woman with kind eyes and neatly combed gray hair, stood. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice was clear. "Yes, Your Honor," she replied. "We, the jury, find Michael B. Jordan not guilty on all charges." The courtroom erupted. Reporters scrambled for the exits, their voices merging into a cacophony. "Jordan won, and scandal of the century over." Spectators cheered. Some shouted in joy, others whispered in disbelief. Anna Martinez and Takesha Williams, seated in the back, embraced, their eyes glistening with tears. Kane froze, her face pale as marble, while Reese, among the spectators, bowed his head, hiding his eyes. Michael closed his eyes and exhaled. His shoulders relaxed slightly, but he didn't smile or raise a fist in triumph. He simply nodded, as if confirming something to himself, and looked at the jury with quiet gratitude. Taylor struck his gavel, demanding silence. "Mr. Jordan," he said, his voice soft, almost paternal, "you've astonished this courtroom, and me. You reminded us that truth isn't a privilege, it's a right worth fighting for. Case dismissed." Michael stood, his gaze meeting Taylor's. "Thank you, Your Honor," he replied quietly. "And thank you to the jury for listening." As he gathered his papers, the courtroom slowly emptied. Reporters chased headlines, spectators shared their reactions, and Kane hurried out without a word. But Taylor lingered, watching Michael. He felt a strange warmth in his chest, a mix of respect and something akin to hope. An hour later, Michael stepped out of the courthouse. The crowd outside exploded with shouts and applause. Cameras flashed, microphones thrust toward him, but he raised a hand, asking for silence. "I'm not giving comments," he said, his voice calm but resonant. "All I'll say is, truth is worth fighting for. Thank you to everyone who believed in me." He climbed into a black SUV and drove off, leaving behind a city buzzing with his name. That evening, talk shows dissected every moment of the trial. Analysts called Michael a legal phenomenon, and social media exploded with memes. Michael as a lawyer captioned, "Creed in court," but for those in the courtroom, it was more than a spectacle. It was a moment when one man changed the rules. Months passed. Michael returned to filming. A new movie about a boxer battling injustice was already selling out before its premiere. But rumors whispered that he hadn't abandoned law. In quiet Philadelphia offices, he consulted with attorneys, taking on cases of racial discrimination and police misconduct. His name became a symbol, not just of fame, but of quiet, steadfast fighting for justice. Judge Taylor, sitting in his office, sometimes reviewed the case recordings. One evening, holding a glass of bourbon, he turned on the TV and saw an interview with Anna Martinez. She recounted how Michael had thanked her after the trial, sending a basket of flowers with a note. "Your truth changed everything." Taylor smiled, for the first time in a long while. He stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the city. Evening Philadelphia sparkled with lights, and somewhere in that bustling world, one person's small steps were already beginning to shift the rules. Taylor didn't know what lay ahead, but for the first time in years, he felt that the system he served might still be just.